I have business meetings, um, uh, after every other meeting, not every, if I say every meeting, that would be an exaggeration. Every other meeting, there's a discussion mostly around some sort of an enterprise AI undertaking.
Hmm.
Very exciting, very interesting. And then after the meeting, a couple of people move on to the next meeting, one or two people stay, and then I get something like this. Frank, what do you think is really going on?
Right.
How do you think this plays out? I have kids, I have a job. So there is the anxiety, right? It's
100%.
exciting, but there's anxiety there, right? For all of us. So what is your advice to the average person in the average company that reads these books and will hopefully read this book, if I get the lighting right? Um, what is your advice to them other than to just, self-medicate?
Well, I'm always a fan of self-medicating, but we'll leave that to a different discussion, a different time. Look, there are a few things, and I wouldn't say that this was my advice so much as the people that I interviewed for the book and that contributed to the book, because I would ask them the same question: what advice would you give somebody just entering the labor force? Was the way I asked the question, and there were basically two pieces of advice that I'll paraphrase. One was you have to be a lifelong learner. The amount of time in which a skill abates, meaning it's no longer monetizable, used to be 30 years. Now we think it's kind of 4 to 6 years, depending on the skill. And so if you are not constantly upskilling yourself, you are increasing your risk of not being able to monetize that skill and being out of a job. And so being a lifelong learner and always be thinking about, well, what are the new technologies in my field? What are the new approaches, processes, and ways to do things? So that is just sound advice for everybody. The second thing I would say is if you're thinking about this kind of de novo, like, all right, I'm, in high school, I'm in college, and which path do I go down to increase my probability that I'm going to have a job over the next 40 years? I would say go hard. Either go hard human or go hard tech. Now, hard tech, I think that's an easy one to understand, right? Jobs in robotics and AI and data and software programming and analytics and blockchain and security, those jobs are growing by leaps and bounds. And there will be massive, massive need for people in those industries and those job functions for decades to come. So that's the easy one to understand. The other one, though, is hard human. To focus in on the areas that are not automatable. So when we say automatable, Frank, we'll talk about repetitive high volume processes because computers can automate, AI systems can automate the things that are done over and over again the same. But when it starts to deviate, when you start to involve some creativity, when you start to involve some design, when you start to involve some empathy and some understanding of the human interaction, computers go from incredibly proficient to like not
Right.
proficient at all. And the idea that AI will catch up to that any time in the next 10 to 20 years is to me laughable. Like the idea that a robot on the phone, I will think that it's a human after a couple of minutes, laughable.
Right.
So going hard human are a series of jobs around HR and sales and marketing and customer service and support that our friends at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the World Economic Forum also feel are going to grow tremendously. And so if you're going to go down one of those paths, or if you're going to pick a new path, go hard, because those are the jobs that are growing.
Oh, excellent advice. Now let's switch over from the corporate perspective, right? So I envision that in your mind is this spectrum of traditional plain old fashioned corporation and then kind of this next gen agile corporation. How would you describe just, if you're at a cocktail reception, somebody says, how would you define today, right?
Mhm.
Um, how would you define agile? How would you differentiate it?
I would differentiate it by a company that has variabilized its largest cost, meaning its labor. Almost every single company's largest cost is labor, and that cost is predominantly a fixed cost. And the more you can turn that fixed cost into a variable cost, the more agile of an enterprise you have. So how quickly can your cost structure respond to changes in revenue? flex up, or as we saw during this horrific pandemic, flex down.
Makes sense. Are there companies that names you could mention, even in Global 2000, where you would say, here's an example of pick maybe one, a name somebody would know that said, these guys killed it. Look at this. This is a textbook study on how it's done.
I think when you look at a company like Apple, when you look at a company like Google, and you actually count up the number of people that go into designing, creating, selling, and supporting their products, the vast majority of people in that chain do not work for Apple or Google. The vast, vast majority. And so when there's not a lot of demand, it is very easy for them to say, all right, Foxconn and everyone else in our supply chain, because Apple could have made the choice to own that workforce. A lot of companies have.
Right.
They do not. And so when you start to look at the number of people they engage on a temp basis, on a freelance basis, on a vendor basis, they are incredibly agile corporations. I mean, one study said that 95% of the workers that are involved in creating, designing, selling, and moving and supporting the iPhone are not Apple workers.
No, interesting. And it makes total sense. So, so based on where you are, right, you talk about transitions and duration. I think you're on the cusp of a change now. Should we assume that maybe you have a concept in your mind of a budding agile startup?
So, look, I was super fortunate to build WorkMarket, enterprise software that enables corporations to manage their freelancers. We were super fortunate to sell it to ADP. And as part of that deal, I agreed to be a part of ADP, which is an amazing company. And we had an amazing, amazing journey there. And the WorkMarket team is still killing it there. But I gave my word that I would stay for a certain period of time, and that period of time is up. And so having fulfilled my obligation, I will now ride off. And is it highly likely that I'll emerge back in about a year, maybe two, given how long it takes to build, with another startup? It is highly likely.
Well, Jeff Wald, my money's on you, buddy. You have a great track record. You have a great reputation in the business. You also happen to be a heck of a nice guy, which doesn't hurt. So I appreciate you taking the time and allowing me to ask you a few questions that I could share with my network. Good luck to you. For those of you, again, viewing this, get a hold of this book. It really is awesome. It's timely. And also connect with Jeff on LinkedIn. I don't know if there's any room. You may be maybe no more. You have to get in line to connect.
Always room.
With you.
Always room.
Kind of a delayed thing. But thanks again for your time and good luck. Keep us posted as to how things are playing out, my man.
Thank you so much, Frank. Stay safe.
My pleasure.